Hello and welcome to today's Partner Infopedia web conference. This is the fifth of the Windows 10 Learning Series, Windows 10 Deployment. Presenting for us today, please welcome Senior Product Marketing Manager Michael Niehaus. Michael, you now have the floor.
So for the next, hopefully about an hour or so, we'll talk about Windows 10 for the enterprise, focusing on what does that mean from a deployment perspective. And really to start off, to talk about that, we need to kind of position this as a shift. So what we've done traditionally for deploying Windows in larger organizations is we've used deployment tools like System Center and Microsoft Deployment Toolkit to perform what we would generally call a wipe and load, where we are capturing the user state from an OS, laying down a new image, reinstalling applications, and then putting all the data and settings back. That's a great process, but we wanted to make sure that we could come up with some other alternatives to simplify things. So one of those is by doing a managed in-place upgrade. So leveraging setup.exe from the Windows media to automate the upgrade process, automatically preserving all the data, settings, apps, and drivers. That is just an overall simple process that doesn't require a whole lot of engineering on the customer's part. It just requires running setup with the necessary switches. So that's the big push for Windows 10, is to get that in-place upgrade as a viable option. We also want to provide more capabilities around new devices. So traditionally, enterprises today will take a brand new device once they get it out of the box and immediately re-image it with their own custom image. But there are some scenarios where customers would like to be able to just take an existing device, take the operating system that was provided on it, and customize it to turn it into an enterprise device without doing any type of re-imaging. That would enable scenarios like shipping a new PC directly to a remote employee and having them configure it themselves. So we'll talk about all of those scenarios in a little more depth as we go through. First, though, we want to talk a little bit about application and device compatibility, starting with the hardware. The hardware requirements for Windows 10 are exactly the same as they were for Windows 7, Windows 8, and Windows 8.1. So any device capable of running any of those earlier operating systems should run Windows 10 without any issue. There are some very minor gotchas with machines that may have been able to run Windows 7 x64 that aren't capable of running Windows 10 x64, but it's the same processor instruction set restrictions that were in place for Windows 8.1. So the same machines wouldn't be able to run Windows 8.1 x64 that wouldn't be able to run Windows 10 x64. But it's a very, very small percentage of machines that really shouldn't be in use in most organizations anyway. So overall, same CPU speed requirements, same memory requirements, same disk space requirements. All of those hardware requirements are unchanged. For desktop applications, we would expect very good compatibility with the majority of applications working without any issues. Now, when customers made the migration from Windows XP to Windows 7, they had to put in a fair amount of work to get desktop application compatibility challenges solved. But for those that have gone from 7 to 8 or 7 to 8.1, it's been a much easier task. We expect the migration process to Windows 10 will be much closer to what you would have seen going from 7 to 8.1 than it would have been comparing that older process of going from XP to 7. So much easier than what we've seen in the past. There will still be some applications where there just could be some that just don't work because of some odd thing the developer's done or some other dependency that we just couldn't take into account in the Windows 10 development process. But for the most part, we're trying to identify those through the preview process and make sure that we can make adjustments to ensure very strong desktop app compatibility. With Windows Store apps, for those that are coming from Windows 8.1, any modern app that runs on Windows 8.1 should run on Windows 10 as well. Those are a little bit easier for us because we can actually test them. We've got hundreds of thousands of apps in the Windows Store. We can use our own test automation to validate that they still launch, that they still operate correctly, even on Windows 10. So we tend to find any compatibility issues fairly quickly with those applications, and we can make sure that we take care of those as soon as we discover them. So no big concerns there. That brings us to Internet Explorer, which has been a bit of a challenge in the past, where we've gone through different IE versions with different operating systems, and each version would generally bring its own set of compatibility challenges. What we're trying to do there is leverage our existing enterprise investments to take the capabilities that we've added to IE11 with enterprise mode and things like that, and carry those forward into Windows 10. So we will have IE11 inside of Windows 10 running the same basic engine that you could run on top of Windows 7 or Windows 8.1 today. Leveraging enterprise mode to give you compatibility with the websites that work best with IE8, and leveraging the HTML5 standards compliant IE11 engine for modern websites. So that's what we are encouraging customers to get to on Windows 7 today as a stepping stone to Windows 10. What's really going to force that along in the short term, though, is on Windows 7, IE11 is going to be the only supported browser as of January 2016. So customers already need to be figuring out how are they going to migrate to IE11 on Windows 7. A lot of them are running IE8 or IE9 today. They'll need to make that jump to IE11 in order to continue to get security updates as of January 2016. So for most customers, the first step to getting to Windows 10 is to get to IE11 on Windows 7, and then it's going to be fairly easy for them to get to Windows 10 because it's going to be running the same IE11 that they're already using on Windows 7. We will have a new browser on Windows 10 as well, Project Spartan. You probably read about it. That is a new modern browser that's really jettisoning all of the legacy compatibility components and focusing on the modern web. That's great for consumers, and that's probably great for some enterprise scenarios, but because enterprises tend to have lots of legacy web-based applications, we think that they'll probably need to continue to run IE11 for those types of web pages. We also do have some other tools that we can leverage as part of this. We've got an Enterprise Site Discovery Toolkit, which is useful for creating an inventory of the websites that people actually visit. So we can collect that from existing machines and analyze that to figure out which websites need to be validated, which ones are expected to work, just to gather more information about what's really important to the organization as far as web browsing goes. So let's talk some more then about deployment choices. The traditional process, wipe and load, would go through several steps of first capturing the data and settings from the existing operating system, then laying down what's typically a custom operating system image, the golden image that's been put together by the organization containing all of their customizations and apps and other configuration items. After that's been laid down, we would inject the drivers necessary for a particular model of machine so that the images we create aren't model specific. We can have one image that's supported on all different models. We can then boot into the new OS, install the necessary applications, really putting back the apps that were there before, and then restoring the data and settings to get everything back the way it was. That traditional process leverages System Center or the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. Those will be updated to fully support Windows 10, so this is still an option for any customer who prefers doing this traditional wipe and load. But what we really want to encourage is in-place upgrade as an alternative. So doing an in-place upgrade, we can let Windows do the work. Instead of leveraging a 75-step process to do the wipe and load, we can just run setup.exe and let it take care of capturing the data and settings as well as the apps and drivers from the existing OS. It then lays down a standard operating system image, so not using any custom or golden image from the organization. And then it will put everything back. So it will copy across the data and the settings, preserve the applications, and where necessary, even pull forward the drivers from the old OS as well. That process is very reliable, relatively quick. I mean, the typical migration time can be between 1 and 2 hours. It's fully supported for all of our existing supported OSs, so for anyone coming from Windows 7, 8, or 8.1, they can leverage this to go directly from those OS versions to Windows 10. There are a few limitations with that, like we can't change from x86 to x64 during the process, so there will be some scenarios where an in-place upgrade isn't an option, and wipe and load becomes the viable alternative for those scenarios, but the large percentage of customers should be able to leverage an in-place upgrade to easily get to Windows 10, preserving pretty much everything during the process. The third process then is for new devices, where we want to be able to take a new device and transform it into an enterprise device. That could include adding additional software, applying configuration, even changing the SKU of Windows, where today we would need to do either a full in-place upgrade or a wipe and load to go from a device that ships with Windows Pro to one that's running Windows Enterprise. Now we'll just be able to run a simple command basically to change the SKU of Windows, and after a simple reboot, the machine will now be running Enterprise. So those types of provisioning capabilities will let us do these types of transformation scenarios. That's great for new devices. We're not really positioning it for scenarios outside of that. For system builders and OEMs, they would use these same provisioning tools for other scenarios. But for enterprises, generally they'll continue using MDT and Config Manager for most traditional scenarios and the new provisioning tools for these new devices. So let's drill in a little bit more on each one of these. First, moving in place. In-place upgrade will be fully supported for Windows 7, Windows 8, and Windows 8.1. This is the way we would prefer organizations deploy. It's not to say 100% of them will, but it is certainly an option. If you're a consumer running, say, a pro version or even a home version of Windows, you would upgrade to Windows 10 using Windows Update. But that's not really what enterprises want. Enterprises want more of a scalable, controllable approach. So most of them will use System Center Configuration Manager or MDT to manage the process. In fact, if the device is currently running the enterprise SKU of Windows, it won't be offered an upgrade through Windows Update. Instead, the only mechanism is using more of a media-based approach, where Config Manager or MDT push out the media to the device and run setup in that way. This does use the standard Windows 10 image, so you can't use a custom image for an in-place upgrade, really because Windows doesn't know how to merge applications that have been added to a custom image with the apps that are already in the current OS as part of the upgrade process. Imagine you've got a machine running Office 2003 and you try to upgrade using an image that contains Office 2013. The net result would be two versions of Office merged together, and there's no real chance that either one of those works properly after that process completes. So that's why we need to have a clean standard image, because we're going to lay down the OS and then migrate forward all the app settings and drivers from that original OS. We already talked about the speed of this, taking about 1 to 2 hours to do the in-place upgrade, but more important is if we run into any issues during the deployment, even if it's something like power failure or someone pulls a network cable or any type of issue, when Windows detects the issue and recovers from that issue, it's going to roll you back to the original OS and let you analyze the failure and run it again at a later point in time. So there's no actual lost time because the machine is left in an unusable state. Instead, we will detect any issue that occurs, and if we see anything that doesn't quite look right, we will roll back to the original OS version just in case, where we can then analyze, remediate, try again. This is the same basic process that we used to go from Windows 8 to Windows 8.1. We've also tried this with some customers going from Windows 7 to 8.1 just to learn what additional improvements are needed in the upgrade tools. And we've added those enhancements in Windows 10 to make it better than what we had provided in the past. Adding things like additional command line options to fully automate and hide the upgrade process. Adding more control over the driver migration process, changing the way logging works. So all of those enhancements have been integrated into setup so that we know, so that we can take those learnings from the customers that we've worked with and make those available in Windows 10. We do have some limitations with ISV software that's used for disk encryption. The in-place upgrade at this point doesn't work with third-party disk encryption tools. We are working with those ISVs to add support for that, and we hope that by Windows 10 RTM that we'll have processes and procedures in place working with the top 5 ISVs to show here's how you would do an in-place upgrade with the most popular disk encryption tools that are out there in the market. If it's a machine running our own disk encryption capability, BitLocker, that just works. Our setup process, the upgrade process, knows how to detect a machine that is running BitLocker, suspend the protectors in BitLocker, do the in-place upgrade, and then turn BitLocker back on at the end of the process. So let's just quickly look at the process of going from a Windows 7 machine to Windows 10, in this case using System Center Configuration Manager. So we would start off in the Windows 7 operating system and target a task sequence to the machine. So we would push this out to an existing device. That task sequence would begin to run on the machine, preparing it for the Windows 10 upgrade, just making sure that the Configuration Manager client is all set and ready for the operating system to be replaced out from under it. We'll then run setup using all the necessary command line switches to fully automate the in-place upgrade. Once that setup process gets to a certain point, it reboots and setup takes over, laying down the new operating system image and migrating all of the apps, data, and settings from the old OS into that. And when that process finishes, you can then log into the new OS and everything is like it was before. So the desktop background is migrated, the pinned icons are still present, the desktop icons are all in the same place. We still have the start menu migrated, the Windows 10 version of the start menu with all of your pinned icons on that as well as the new start pane where we can add in the pinned applications as well. So that's the general process that we would go through for enterprises. Now the consumer process really is different than that, and we should probably take a quick look at that as well. So let me switch over to a different machine. So if you're familiar with the Windows Insider program, that's the pre-release process for getting bits out to all of the testers who want to try out Windows 10. And if you sign in as an insider, you can download an update that you would install on a Windows 7 device and eventually on Windows 8.1 as well, where that particular executable updates the Windows Update client. And once the Windows Update client is updated, you would then be able to see the preview available in Windows Update. So all that we need to do to initiate the installation is click to get started. It'll download all the bits initially. It will run a validation check to make sure that the current environment is fully supported by Windows 10 and that all the applications work and that there aren't any other known issues that you should know about. So it performs that validation up front and then automatically performs the in-place upgrade as well. So that's consumer focused. That would be available to any machine that talks directly to the Windows Update that isn't running the enterprise SKU. We would never offer an update to the enterprise SKU, and for the machines that are running Pro, we would also have the ability to block that. So we will have some blocking mechanisms that will be available as well if there are some environments where you don't want to make this available. So if we were to go away for an hour or so and come back, and we would be able to see this process continuing pretty much exactly the same way that we click through with the Config Manager client. Switch back over. So the next topic then, talking about provisioning. The basic process that we want to be able to do is take off-the-shelf hardware, do something to it, so provision it so that it's ready for productive use. So that's the tooling that we've been working on to be able to create a provisioning package, which is pretty much a self-contained set of configuration that we want to apply to a machine that we can then just run on any of the machines to configure that particular machine. The main tool that we're using to do that is this new Windows Imaging and Configuration Designer tool. It's provided as part of the Assessment and Deployment Kit, the ADK. The preview version of that's already out. Here's what it's looking like today, although we're still working on the UI, so hopefully the final version won't be quite so ugly looking, but we are working to provide a lot of capabilities into this where we can say, in this case, let's create a provisioning package. I'll call it Enterprise in this case. I'll say that it's a provisioning package for all Windows editions. And then I can specify what I want to configure. So I can add apps, I can add drivers, I can add language packs, Windows updates, all the standard stuff there, but then also configure a variety of settings for the OS. The one setting that I have configured here is the Upgrade Edition product key. So I can easily put in the product key for an enterprise SKU and then click the Build button to create this provisioning package, which gets saved to a single file. It's in this case a ppkg file, the provisioning package extension. So once I have that, then I can copy that file in a variety of ways to a particular device, and once it's there, run it on that device to perform those configuration items. So let me switch over to a machine where I've got that waiting. So I've already got the provisioning package here. We've got proent.ppkg, which is the provisioning package itself, .ppkg file. If I double click on it, it will prompt first for elevation, as this requires making some changes at the machine level. And then it will ask for permission. Now in this case it's asking for permission because the provisioning package wasn't signed, so it's not marked as trusted by this organization. So this can be suppressed as well, but I'll just go ahead and click Allow in this case, and it will apply that provisioning package. The command line window in the background is a bug. We'll get rid of that in a subsequent build. But now that that provisioning package has been applied, in the background it's already beginning to work on changing the SKU of Windows. If we look real closely down at the bottom right, it says that we're currently running Windows 10 Pro Technical Preview. Fairly soon the machine will reboot, and when it starts to come back up again, it will install additional features, and when you log back in again, you would then see that it's running Enterprise. So we'll let that one run for a little bit because that'll take a few minutes, and we'll come back and check on that shortly. I was hoping that it would reboot, but never fails. It takes a little bit longer than I care to wait. So that's the basic idea, that we want to be able to do provisioning, not re-imaging, where we can transform the device, installing apps, applying configuration. We can ideally enroll that device at the same time in a mobile device management service. So the idea is that we can use provisioning to do just enough to the machine to get it to a manageable state. Once that manageable state, once that MDM enrollment is in place, then we can do ongoing management via MDM or via configuration manager or through some other management tool, rather than trying to do this as any type of using provisioning packages for ongoing management. That's not really the idea. It's really just trying to do enough to provision the device and get it to a manageable state. We can copy these provisioning packages to media. We can deploy them to phone devices using USB tethering. We can even email them out to people and say, double click on this to apply it to your machine. So it's a variety of ways that we'll be able to do a Windows 10 RTM. Longer term, we also want to provide options for doing this automatically from the cloud. So maybe when you type in your email address, it says, oh, I recognize that you're from Contoso. I will automatically download a provisioning package for your organization and apply it to the machine. Same thing could be done when you connect to the corporate network and join the machine into a domain. It could automatically locate a server that contains the provisioning package and apply it. We also expect to be able to do NFC tags or QR codes to trigger the installations, but all of those capabilities are things that we're looking at for after Windows 10 RTM. At RTM, we're primarily just focused on the tooling to create the provisioning packages, as well as the more manual mechanisms for installing those. We would have mechanisms available to inject these into an operating system image, so that image then could be set up so that when it boots up for the first time, it automatically applies the provisioning packages. Okay, let me switch back over to my machine, which is actually doing something now. So it started to reboot. It's now adding features into the OS. And after a couple of minutes, it will complete that process and let us actually log in. So there's not a whole lot to that. It's a simple enough process that only takes a few minutes to migrate a machine from Windows Pro to Windows Enterprise. So we'll certainly enable that. Now, one of the key things that's required to enable that is that the Pro install actually contains all of the necessary enterprise bits. So we don't need to go out to Windows Update or WSUS or provide media in order to make that SKU change. All the necessary enterprise bits are already present. So it's actually simple for us to change from one SKU to the next because all of the bits are being carried along with all of the SKUs. Okay, let me switch back to the deck again. We can't forget about traditional deployment, since that is the mechanism that most customers use today. So we will be updating the assessment and deployment kit to support Windows 10. We've already released a preview version of that, which you can get from the dev.windows.com site. That will support deploying Windows 10, obviously, but it will also support deploying Windows 7, Windows 8, and Windows 8.1. So we don't want to get into a situation where we're forcing people to set up multiple environments just because they want to continue to support Windows 7 and deploy Windows 10 to begin their evaluation process. So making sure that we can support the OSs that they want to use in one kit is a key feature for us. We'll be updating System Center Configuration Manager 2012 and 2012 R2 to add support for Windows 10. That will be delivered in the form of a service pack. So we'll provide a service pack to Configuration Manager to add support for Windows 10. We'll also release an update to MDT 2013 called MDT 2013 Update 1 to add support for Windows 10 there too. So all the tools get updated, new ADK, service pack for System Center, and an update to MDT. Those add support for Windows 10, but they don't really change the process that much. It's really just adding support for the latest versions of the tools, latest versions of the OS, fixing any issues that we find as part of the Windows 10 testing process, and off you go. So for most IT pros who are used to this existing process, they'll look at Windows 10 and say, all right, nothing's really changed in the image creation process or in the deployment process itself. So you would be able to take a machine that's running MDT or Config Manager, download the Windows 10 image to it, drop it into your deployment share or into your Config Manager environment, and off you go. So as simple as replacing your existing Windows 7 or Windows 8.1 image with a Windows 10 image, and the exact same setup will work. The preview for MDT 2013 is available now. That can be downloaded from the connect.microsoft.com website. The Configuration Manager service pack, there should be a preview available for that sometime next month. So keep an eye out for that and try that when it comes out. There'll also be a new version of Config Manager released, Config Manager vNext, for lack of a better name at this point, which will add potentially some more Windows 10 functionality. But as far as what's really required to support, manage, and deploy Windows 10, just applying the service pack to an existing 2012 or 2012 R2 environment will work just fine. If you still have any customers that are running Config Manager 2007, there will be a compatibility with Windows 10 to ensure that Config Manager 2007 can manage a Windows 10 client, but it won't be able to deploy Windows 10. So the operating system deployment feature won't be able to deploy Windows 10, but it can't deploy Windows 8.1 either. So that's not really a change. That's just a continuation of the policies that have been put in place. It can deploy Windows 7, no problem, but if you wanted to deploy Windows 8.1 or Windows 10, you need to upgrade to ideally Config Manager 2012 R2 or vNext in order to get that support. So that leaves us with some different deployment approaches based on what operating system the customer is running today. And we get these questions a lot from customers who say, well, I'm running Windows 7 today. What should I do? And at this point, really, we don't see a customer running Windows 7 doing a large-scale Windows 8.1 migration. They know Windows 10 is on the horizon, and they're going to plan for using Windows 10 for the bulk of those machines, for all of their existing machines. What we do think is worthwhile still with Windows 8.1 is using it on touch-enabled devices and tablets for specific scenarios. Like maybe they're evaluating using tablets for a particular line of business application or a certain population of their users wants to be able to use small, lightweight, portable tablets. For those, Windows 8.1 is really the only answer. Windows 7 on a tablet device most of the time doesn't work at all, but certainly it's not optimized for uh, running Windows 7 on a tablet device. So we would say to look at Windows 8.1 for these touch-enabled scenarios, look at it for these line of business applications, but plan for the broad Windows 10 deployment later on. Now, in order to get ready for that, they need to upgrade to IE11 by January 2016. Remember, we talked about support for older browsers ending in January 2016. So if they want to continue to receive security updates for IE, for any version of IE, they need to be running IE11 on Windows 7 by January 2016. So that's step one. That's the biggest action plan for most customers, is to get to IE11. And at the same time, you can begin looking at Windows 10 and looking at that as the next step beyond the IE11 migration. For those that are running Windows 8, the original Windows 8 release, support for that ends in January 2016 as well. So you need to either get to Windows 8.1 or to Windows 10 by January 2016. Now, most organizations aren't quite fast enough to get to Windows 10 to move to a new OS in, say, a 6-month period of time. So for most organizations running Windows 8, they need to be looking at Windows 8.1 now. They need to complete that migration by January 2016, and it's probably going to take them some number of months to do that. So going through an evaluation process, a testing process, and a full Windows 10 deployment by January 2016 is just probably not a workable plan for them. So we would generally suggest they begin moving to Windows 8.1 now and then look at Windows 10 at their leisure after they've completed their Windows 8.1 migration. For those that are currently running Windows 8.1, it's easy for them. There's no real pressing deadlines. They're already running IE11. They're already running a supported OS that will continue to be supported for a number of years. So for them, they can evaluate Windows 10 and deploy it across all devices when they're ready. We do have a preview process in place today. We have the Windows Insider program, which is designed to enable enthusiasts and IT pros to try out the new Windows 10 capabilities as they become available. And we've implemented this to use a variety of rings. So when we talk about rings, we're talking about just different groups of people who receive builds as they're being created. So inside of Microsoft, we have 3 rings that receive each new build as they go out. There's a canary ring that's basically the daily build to make sure that it's somewhat solid as the code continues to change. We then expand out to an internal fast ring, which is for all of our engineers and partners and others who want to be able to see things as the features are added. And then beyond that, we have a Microsoft IT ring where we expand it out to the rest of the people who are wanting to try out Windows 10. Each one of those rings adds more rigor and requires that the OS be more stable and have fewer issues, or at the very least have workarounds for issues that we've discovered. Only once it's gone through those rings does it go out to the Windows Insiders. So our first fast Windows Insider ring, the idea is that they should get new builds probably a couple of times a month, but only after we've done that internal validation first. Once the insiders have run it and found any issues that might have happened and we've developed either fixes or workarounds for those issues, then we can go broader to the slow insider ring before we then go out to more of the general population as kind of a released preview build. That's the current process that we're using for the Windows 10 development cycle, but that process isn't going to end when Windows 10 ships. We'll continue to use this process for ongoing development of Windows. We expect to release new features every so often, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, having new feature releases of Windows 10, and they'll go through these exact same flights. So we envision customers will want to continue to have devices enrolled with the Insider program so they can see the new features as they become available, evaluate them, provide feedback on those, and pass that back to us so that we can be making real-time adjustments and real-time fixes in the new features as they're being developed. It also gives them visibility into the new features before they're ever released, so that you can begin the planning process to figure out when this new feature is actually released some number of months down the road, what will we do with it? Are there features that we're interested in? Are there ones that we don't care about? So really, it provides you a whole lot of additional visibility into the ongoing development process too. So just something to keep in mind, that you want to think of the insiders and preview process as something that will never end, that it will continue on and will continue working to add new features to Windows 10 through this program. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of the deployment capabilities that we're working on with Windows 10. I mean, the real goal is to provide more deployment choices, both for the traditional deployment as well as in-place upgrade and provisioning capabilities, to be able to show you the previews as they're happening through the Insider program by ensuring compatibility and making sure that everything just works. With that, let me wrap it up and we'll turn it back over to our coordinator, and thanks for attending.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the audio portion of our Partner Info PDF Web Conference. So with that, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to our presenter, and thank you for logging in and joining us today.